After 3 kids and 15 years, my wife stopped treating me like a man, just a co-parent. A provider. A roommate. Then one night, a woman at the gym said, "I bet you used to feel wanted." And for the first time in years, I did. But when I got home, my wife didn't even ask where I had been. A month later, she did, when she found a text that read, "Tonight was incredible. 15 years of marriage. 3 kids. A house in the suburbs." On paper, everything looked perfect. But in reality, I felt like I had disappeared. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't some big moment where things fell apart. It was slow, gradual, like a dripping faucet you don't notice until the sink is overflowing. At first, it was small. She stopped greeting me at the door when I came home from work. Then, she stopped saying goodnight. Eventually, she stopped looking at me at all. We used to talk. About our days, our dreams, the dumb things that made us laugh. Now, the only conversations we had were about logistics. Did you take the car in for an oil change? What time is the parent-teacher conference? We're out of milk. Can you grab some on the way home? Nothing deeper than that. Nothing real. The physical part? Gone. I don't even remember the last time she touched me, and I'm not just talking about that. I mean anything. A hand on my arm. A kiss on the cheek. Sitting close enough for our legs to touch on the couch. It was like we had become coworkers. Partners in raising 3 kids, keeping a house running, making sure bills were paid. I told myself this was just how marriage worked after kids. That love changed over time. That I was being selfish for wanting more. But I missed her. I missed being wanted. I just didn't realize how much until the night at the gym. I started going to the gym 6 months ago, mostly to clear my head. I had never been the gym guy, but I needed something that was just mine. Somewhere that wasn't home or work. That's where I met Lauren. We weren't friends, not really. We just ended up working out around the same time most nights. Sometimes we'd exchange a few words, joke about the old guys who hogged the machines, or complain about the music. That night, she must have seen something in my face. "You okay?" she asked, wiping sweat from her forehead. I shrugged. "Long day." She tilted her head. "I bet you used to feel wanted." I have no idea why she said it. Maybe she had been through something similar. Maybe she was just reading the exhaustion in my face. But something inside me cracked. I laughed it off, but for the rest of the night, those words kept repeating in my head. "I bet you used to feel wanted." I did. Once. I didn't cheat. I didn't even think about it. I wasn't that guy. But when I got home, Julia was already in bed, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up. Didn't ask where I had been. That night, lying next to her, I realized something. I could have stayed out all night, and she wouldn't have noticed. Maybe she wouldn't have even cared. For the next month, I started paying attention. To her. To me. To us. I tried. I made breakfast for the kids every morning. I complimented her when she actually looked up from her phone. I reached for her hand when we were out with the kids. Nothing. If anything, she pulled further away. I thought maybe I was imagining it. That maybe I was being dramatic. Then one night, I came home late, and she was sitting up in bed, staring at my phone. My stomach dropped. "What's this?" she asked, holding up the screen. It was a text message. "Tonight was incredible." My heart stopped. It wasn't from Lauren. It wasn't from any woman. It was from a guy in my running group, talking about our marathon training that evening. But Julia didn't know that. She was staring at me like she didn't even recognize me. Like she had never even thought to be suspicious before now. "Do you think I'm cheating?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer. And that's when I knew. She had never noticed me leaving. Never noticed me coming home late. Never noticed me at all. Until she thought someone else had. She didn't say anything for a long time. Just sat there, my phone in her hand, her face unreadable. I could hear the clock ticking. The sound of the wind outside. The distant hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Then, finally, she spoke. "Who is she?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was insane. "There is no she, Julia," I said, shaking my head. "Read the text. It's from Kevin. From my running group. She glanced at the screen, like she was just noticing the name for the first time. Her fingers tightened around my phone. You've been coming home late. I let out a breath. Yeah. I have. But you never asked where I was. Not once. Until now. She flinched, just a little. I wanted her to fight me on that. To argue. To tell me I was wrong. She didn't. She looked down at the phone again, scrolling. You've been texting a lot. Because suddenly, now she cared. I crossed my arms. What do you want me to say, Julia? That I have a secret life? That I've been sneaking around? I go to the gym. I go on runs. I come home. I sleep next to you, and you don't even look at me. Her jaw tightened. That's not fair. Isn't it? I said. Because it's the truth. Her hands were shaking now, just slightly. She set my phone down on the nightstand and ran her fingers through her hair. I didn't know you felt like this, she said. I almost laughed again. Of course she didn't. I tried, I said, my voice low. I tried for years. But after a while, you stop trying when nothing changes. And you know what? It didn't even matter to you. Until you thought someone else saw me. Her eyes shot up. That's not true. Then why now? I asked. Why tonight? She didn't answer. And I realized, maybe she had noticed. Maybe she had felt the distance too. Maybe she had just assumed I would always be there, the same way I had assumed she would. I turned to leave the bedroom, not sure where I was going, just knowing I couldn't stand there anymore. Then she said it. I don't know if I love you the way I used to. It felt like a punch to the ribs. I had prepared myself for anger. For accusations. For fights. But not that. Not that. I turned back to her slowly. She was staring at me now, really looking at me for the first time in what felt like forever. Her eyes were wet, her shoulders tense, like she had just admitted something she never meant to say out loud. What do you mean? My voice didn't even sound like mine. She swallowed hard. I don't know, she whispered. I don't know when it happened. I don't know why it happened. I just know, it doesn't feel the same anymore. The room felt smaller. Like the walls were closing in. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because what do you say to that? She wasn't confessing to anything. She wasn't blaming me. She was just telling the truth. And somehow, that was worse. I stood there, staring at her, trying to make sense of what she had just said. I don't know if I love you the way I used to. The words kept echoing in my head, over and over, like a song stuck on repeat. I wanted to yell. To ask her what that even meant. Did she love me at all? Or was she just keeping me around because it was easier? Instead, I just said, okay. That was all I could manage. She looked surprised. Like she had expected me to fight her on it, to demand answers. Maybe even to beg. I didn't. I turned and left the bedroom. I went downstairs, sat in the dark living room, and stared at nothing for a long time. It wasn't like I hadn't felt it before. I had. Every cold shoulder. Every night she turned away from me in bed. Every time she scrolled through her phone while I sat across from her at the dinner table. But hearing her say it out loud. That was different. That made it real. After a while, I heard her footsteps on the stairs. She stood there at the edge of the living room, hesitating. I didn't look at her. Then she said, "Are you seeing someone else?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Are you serious?" She didn't say anything. I turned to face her, my jaw tight. I've spent years feeling invisible to you. And the second you think someone else might have noticed me, now you care. Her face twisted, like she wanted to argue. Like she wanted to tell me I was wrong. But she didn't. Instead, she just whispered, "I don't know what to do." That made two of us. We sat there in silence. Then, suddenly, my phone buzzed. I glanced at it. It was from Lauren. "Hey, I know this is random, but are you okay?" I hadn't told her anything. I hadn't even hinted at what was happening at home. But somehow, she knew. I could feel Julia's eyes on me. And that's when I realized, she had never once worried about where I was or who I was with. Not until now. Not until she realized she might actually lose me. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I even wanted to be held on to anymore. I stared at my phone. The message from Lauren glowed on the screen, simple but heavy. "Hey, I know this is random, but are you okay?" I didn't answer. I could feel Julia watching me. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had been desperate for her attention, her concern, her love. And now that she was finally looking at me, really seeing me, all I felt was exhaustion. "Who is that?" she asked. I turned my phone over, face down on the table. "Does it matter?" Her lips parted slightly. I could see the panic in her eyes. She was afraid. Good. She should be afraid. For years, I had lived in fear of this exact moment, of waking up one day and realizing she didn't love me anymore. But now, I wasn't even sure I loved her anymore. She took a slow breath, her voice shaky. "It's her, isn't it? The woman from the gym." I clenched my jaw. "I never cheated, Julia." She nodded, but her arms wrapped around herself, like she was bracing for something worse. "But you wanted to." I exhaled through my nose. "Yeah," I admitted. For the first time in years, I wanted someone to want me. Her face crumpled. I had seen Julia cry before, during our wedding vows, when each of our children was born, when her mother passed away. But this was different. This wasn't grief. This was regret. She took a step toward me, then stopped. "I don't know how we got here." I shook my head. "You do." The room was too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you hear things you don't want to hear, like the pounding of your own heart. Then she said something I didn't expect. "I was talking to someone too." It felt like the floor cracked beneath me. I laughed, sharp, bitter. "Of course you were." She wiped her face, shaking her head. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" My voice was loud now. "Because I've spent years breaking my own heart in this marriage, and you've barely noticed. And now I find out there was someone else." She flinched at my words. "It wasn't physical," she said quickly. "It was, a friend. Someone I met at work. We just talked." I let out a breath, slow and deep, trying to steady myself. "Did you tell him you don't love me the way you used to?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. I let that silence be my answer. I turned and grabbed my keys from the counter. "I need to get out of here." She reached for me, her fingers barely brushing my arm before I pulled away. "Please, don't leave." I stared at her hand, then at her. "You already lost me, Julia. You just didn't realize it until now." And then I walked out. I drove for a while. No destination, just the road. Lauren texted again. "I don't want to overstep, but if you need to talk, I'm here." I didn't answer. I parked in front of a convenience store and sat there, staring at my reflection in the windshield. Was this it? Was this how 15 years ended? I thought about our wedding day, about the way she had smiled at me when she walked down the aisle. I thought about our first apartment, how we ate takeout on the floor and talked about the future. I thought about the first time she held my hand. The first time she whispered, "I love you." Then I thought about the way she had looked at me tonight, like she wasn't sure who I was anymore. And I realized, I wasn't the same man she had married. Maybe because she wasn't the same woman I had married either. When I finally went home, the house was dark. I walked upstairs and found Julia sitting on our bed, knees pulled to her chest, eyes swollen from crying. She looked up at me, and for the first time in a long time, there was no anger. No resentment. Just sadness. "We're not okay, are we?" she asked softly. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "No. We're not." She nodded, like she had already known the answer. I sat down beside her, staring at our hands resting between us. "I don't want to be like this anymore," she whispered. Neither did I. But the truth was, I didn't know if we could fix it. I didn't know if I wanted to. She reached for my hand. For the first time in years, she reached for me. And for the first time, I hesitated before taking it. Because I wasn't sure if holding on was the right thing to do. Or if it was finally time to let go.